He's kicking on the live stream, so he said 2 minutes until that's on.
Okay.
They're out of water. That was fast. So every time I work out, I go way too much caffeine. I go home shaky. I need food. I need real food. But yeah, it's also like one of my favorite places to go at night. It's just a really good, they got the lights on, vibes, right? Also got a lot of good, like backyard patio stuff. I feel like drinking at everybody's house. Fancy backyard. Right, yeah. Yeah.
He says that before alcohol detail.
Whenever you introduce me, full screen of I was in Germany too. You can tell the stage right here, and they'll really get it. Yeah, absolutely. It's delicious. They have it right over there. It seems like you already know what this is. Yeah, it's kind of doing yeah, are you signed up for the reducing certain that's what I'm the two things I'm going to get after I go say it's pretty busy year. Yeah, we'll have all the database. So I'm going to stick those two things and feel free to call out. Feel free to get out.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. It's a full house. Hopefully, you got some tacos and some brewskis, some drinks. So, quick shout out to Move It for sponsoring the space. Quick shout out to C here for food and drinks. So the theme for tonight is React tools. So we have a good lineup of speakers. These topics came from speakers who volunteered. If you want to volunteer a topic, a theme, a project, you want to showcase something, let me know. We'll put you on the spotlight. That being said, next month, the theme is going to be pretty awesome. It's going to be architecture. We're going to have a talk on client-side rendering versus server-side rendering. And there's also going to be a talk on kind of like mobile development with React Native and the whole full stack. So that's going to be really interesting. If you have a similar theme you want to talk about, let me know. We'll put you up on the list. But again, this is community driven. I'm only doing what you guys want rather than you guys listen to me what I want to talk about. So please volunteer, help out, sponsor, speak, or just come and chat. That being said, there's some changes, positive change. I finally have a co-host, Veronica.
Hi, everyone. Oh, okay. I'm not used to talking mics. I'm not the blah, blah. Okay, anyway, so apparently I'm not good at public speaking. But so you guys probably have seen my face at plenty of the downtown React meetups. I really just have been more behind the scenes helping Roberto. So yeah, if you guys ever need advice, I've done tech recruitment for 4+ years here in Austin. Agency, I just now joined a company called Storable. So we are hiring engineers. So if you are looking for a job, we have jobs. But outside of that, I'm not going to be salesy and try to get you to come work for us. Really just here to be a resource. So if you need help looking at your resume, if you need tips on interviewing or applying for jobs, or just any advice at all about the tech landscape, and as you're trying to get your foot in the door, let me know. More than happy to help. But yeah, so I will let Roberto take the mic again because I'm not great at public speaking.
Yeah, neither am I. Thank you. Cool. So who's hiring? Anyone want to come up here and give a quick shout out of what you're hiring for?
Okay, well, I guess I just said Storable. So Storable is this really neat tech company. You may know them by Sparefoot, but they recently merged and acquired a couple of companies in Raleigh and Kansas City, so we're growing quite a bit. And so Storable is focused on becoming, we are a one-stop shop for all software products and services for the self-storage space. I know that doesn't sound sexy, but it's actually really cool. So let me know. We have a really kick-ass, can I say that? I know it's being recorded. But we have a really kick-ass office space. We have really great benefits. We are hiring both junior and senior JavaScript developers right now. So let me know. I just got approval today on those. So yeah.
Anybody else want to come up here and make a quick shout out?
I'll keep it super short. Hi, my name's Madeline Gordon. I'm with Tech Systems, also do IT recruiting. I specialize in front-end web development. My partner Caitlin's there in the back. And if you are looking or curious, I can share my contact information with AirDrop. So if you throw it on, I'll share it to you right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline.
Hello, everyone. Just Brian Newton from Experian. We're hiring React developers, so hit me or my colleague Elvin back there. So here in Austin off of Barton Skyway. So hit me up if you are looking for a job.
Thank you. Jared?
Yep. Hi, I'm Brandon. I'm with Move It, and we are a consulting agency. We've got small clients like startups, and we have a few bigger clients like MLB and Disney Plus. We are looking for developers, mid-level to senior range, primarily JavaScript and especially React. Even though we're a consulting company, the employees are still salaried, so we get full benefits. Our pay isn't dependent on the work that's coming into us. So it's a really nice place to work.
Cool. Anyone else before we get started? If not, hand it over to the C here, guys.
I guess, yeah.
One more.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Quick show of hands. Who's ever tried to learn a language? Awesome. How did that go in the classroom? Univoice is trying to change that. We need your help. We're hiring developers right now. It's like karaoke. Just let us know what language you're learning and what kind of music you like. Rock out. Simple as that. A little bit more engagement, help people have some fun learning language. So if you are interested in language learning and would like to code, hit me up. We're in the Univoice shirt. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Jesse Collard, and I am COO for See Here, and we're changing how you hear a picture. And I'm going to hand it off here to Ken Lusinger, who's our Chief Marketing Officer. And after that, you're going to hear from Austin Howes, who's one of our star developers. And I hope he had his ears closed during that whole segment on new hires looking for jobs. So anyway, I'm just going to hand it off here to Ken now.
Hello, I'm Ken. I do marketing for C here. Although while people were eating, my title is CMO, but while people were eating, they're like, so you're the taco guy. So from now on, Ken Lusinger, taco guy. All right, so who are we? We are C here. What we do is we've come up with something fairly interesting, and this is actually one of our first times we're unveiling it to the public because guess what? It runs in React. So it's called a CHIF file. Basically what we've done is we found a way to embed audio and other things into an image without creating a media file like a MPEG file. So let me show you. So these slides were made in the brewery down the street. So if there's misspellings, it's out of order, sue me. All right, so generally what happens is you take your image file and then you take an audio file, and then you're gonna want to put them together. So normally when you do that, you end up with this giant file. So we have you have things like so you have play. So you end up with a MPEG, which is a 7.7 meg file out of this size file. So when you do that, what we've done is you've taken all of that out of the equation. So it's purely the audio file and the image file and text and possibly metadata if you want. As developers, it's you guys' call. So now we have a see here file, which is you add these two together and it's 826K. Now, so if you're doing over video, you're like, oh, that's not much of a savings, the cloud. But think about this. If you have an e-commerce website and you want to add in a layer of interactivity to it, and you have 20 items, do you really want people to be trying to download and parse, and especially through your apps and through mobile, all those movies? So this is a little something that will give you guys an advantage, and it's free. So what happens when you? Okay, there we go. So there is a bit of a delay. So now when we say let's put audio into an image file. So one of the things, while it's boring, it's really important. So we're talking about ADA compliance and digital accessibility. Right now in the United States alone, there are 7 million people who are visually impaired. And so if you could put audio in your image, as opposed to right now it's an alt tag and some descriptors. So what we're doing is you can actually embed audio and text in an image, and it's portable. It actually stays with the image. So it's up to your content guys, not you. So usually, you get a PNG and they say, oh, okay, add this for accessibility, or they leave it out. Either way, you guys are the ones that get in trouble. So I've mentioned e-commerce before, and now we're also introducing ADA-friendly SEO. So the data is actually encased in the image file. So if you're doing it correctly, then you have things like if you can embed text and you can embed audio, you can embed other things. So if let's say you use Adobe products occasionally, which you guys probably use it all the time. So now you can actually add copyright protection to your files. Not like some watermark that someone can go through, and like real copyright protection. So, and another thing we're really excited about is see here in the medical realm. So right now you have, so let's say I hurt my knee, right? And I have a doctor does radiology, and another doctor takes notes, audio notes. Okay, so those go on, if you guys don't know what DICOM is, those go on 2 different servers, and what happens if I uploaded this but the notes didn't make it? My notes can actually be embedded in the image file. My blood work can be embedded in the image file. My patient records can be embedded in the image file. It's making it super powerful. So I'm going to talk about ADA for a moment. And so let's talk about accessibility and compliance. Those of you that work for companies, I'm going to go real quickly. You're being sued. There are people out there, they're like, they're like patent trolls, but worse. Like all you need is a disabled guy, and then I could troll a site, and then they get dinged, and then they get sued. Okay, so there's a weak HAG compliance that can be met that is easier with a see here file. And it's a nice thing to do. Don't be a jerk. Make your website accessible to everybody, especially if you have especially if you're selling something, you're marginalizing a whole community, and you're underserving a whole community. So don't be a dick. So all right. So and also developers are blamed, right? So an alt tag doesn't make it, and who gets yelled at? You guys. So this puts the responsibility of that content in those spaces. So let's talk about early adoption. We have just started this. We're still building it. We're at the minimum viable product stage. You're the first React developers we're talking to. Now we're going to where we can put this in other formats like Bootstrap and in different CMSs. And so, but right now we can have you guys, shiny new toy that no one else has. So if you guys want to get on this and build with it, you can. So we brought one of our guys. He's a React guy, and he's going to show you step by step. It will literally take moments, so you got to pay attention. It's like driving through a small town, like you're driving to Austin, Midlothian, so it's driving through a small town. So pay attention because it goes really, really quick. Okay, so.
I don't trust this slanted.
Yeah, that's a sketchy. Okay, so So everybody, this is Austin.
Hey guys. I tend to annoy people when I use a microphone because I'm already kind of loud, so if you'll indulge me. But if anyone can't hear me, let me know and we'll just take the risk. All right, am I on? No, how do I? Oh, let me go. Magic, please. I'm a developer, I don't know how to do things. All right, cool. Thanks. So, yeah, quick introduction. I'm Austin. I worked in 3D modeling for about 15 years, and I got into coding about 2 years ago when I found out how much of a blend it was between technical and artistic skill sets required. Finding out that it wasn't just a recipe that you could never manipulate was really exciting to me. So fell in love with code, got excited about it, and just started joining up. And I met these guys only about 2 months ago, and I really liked the product. As a developer, what I liked about this was that, I've been in companies that the coding team had changed hands multiple times. Some of the alt stuff, some of the accessibility just got lost in the way. And I ended up getting talked to about it in a way that I had no authority over, no knowledge of. I didn't even touch that part of the code yet. And so a couple things for this, it seemed like it rises the tide for everything. I don't have to really worry about, tracking what the other team overseas did or what the other team down the road did or in another city did, or even the guy in the keyboard. It's just done. The content creator themselves actually builds all the accessibility into the file from the creation point of the content itself. So let's say that you're Geico, you're some company. Can we mention companies by name? I don't know. But yeah, let's say you're Geico. When somebody that's using these screen readers lands on a website, instead of it being some, robotic voice or Siri voice that says this is a Geico logo, the guy, whoever the dude is that does the gecko's voice, can actually be their voice actor that creates the audio file that we embed into the logo, that we embed into the image of a car crash or whatever Geico would need. I'm sorry. So yeah, I don't want to, why did I choose something I don't know anything about? But yeah, so we have a lot of brand recognitions that's going to come for free. And this isn't something that you need to worry about like retooling, retailoring, rebuilding, or even just maintaining to make sure it came with. It's just done. As soon as the image itself is built, it's built forever. And for me, that was just like a nice load off, but also there's just a lot of confidence in that where I know that the community that is often overlooked and underserved is actually taken care of, and I can't screw that up. That's always nice, because my job as a coder is to screw things up constantly until that last millisecond. So I just want to build one really quick. There is really nothing to it, and apologies for this is our old site. I'm rebuilding a whole thing in React right now. I only joined recently. So we add an image. We add an audio file. And we'll add a text file. And put whatever metadata you want. You can think of these like Instagram tags. You can search them in a database with your username and find out everything that your company's ever built. You can make sure that, only this user tag on these domain sites will play. We can do a lot of cool stuff with that, but metadata is very exciting for us. Create the stupid thing, let's go. All right, so for anybody that the moon is controversial, I apologize. I know some of y'all are out there. So,
They're at the Angular meeting.
So the screen reader is going to tab over to this location, and we can pull up transcript. Whatever the content creator decides to put in this, you can immediately show these two things. I'm fighting with a dead president right now. So whatever the content creator wants to author in the first place, they can record any amount of customized audio, any length of audio, and any size transcript, any shape of transcript. All the line breaks are in there. So we just want to create something that works for the whole community. And by that we mean basically the globe at this point, because we're talking ADA. So this wasn't our target market. We just realized that we have a thing that can be free for this community that we can just unleash to all developers. We kind of have a hunch, like all good technology, y'all are going to find more creative ways to use it than we ever dreamed up. So we're really relying on the development community to really take hold of this. It's free. We need 3 lines of code. It's a couple import statements. Pretty soon, in a week or two, it's going to be on a CDN. So it'll be just like import bracket thing from this thing location. It's going to be it's already 3 lines, so it's pretty simple, but it should be 2 soon. But basically, we've componentized into a single React component, something you can drag and drop everywhere. You pass it props, and that props is going to be the name of the image file that you want, the source of that shift file. And so it's as easy as that. For a React developer, this is basically like saying, for every image I want, I just need to source it, and it's 1 line of source code, or 1 import line to get it in there, and 1 line to actually say, those are the props for the name of the file itself. And then it's done. So we want to get these things everywhere that we can get them. So, sorry, fuzzy thing floating in front of my face. So I think, am I missing anything?
Yeah, we'd like to open it up to questions.
Yeah, Q&R if you guys
real
want.
quick, I have one quick thing I want to say. We're looking for pilot partners, and we will cover the first, what we're doing with it. We're working with Nobility, and I don't know if any of you know who Nobility is. They're a company here in Austin, and they do manual manual audits of your website to make sure it's accessible, and they'll tell you what's not working, what is, and they'll make recommendations. We're working with them, and anybody on the pilot programs we're going to be working with. We're looking for 3 or 4 pilot partners, and we will cover up to $6,000 of that accessibility testing of your website, of our partners that we're going to work with. We want to learn what may be working and what's not working. We want to learn what from them, so we can go back and correct it, and we will be doing that. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
And there's one other thing I forgot to mention. Instead of just thinking about branding or a alt tag out loud, there's also a cool feature that we talked about where sites like Pinterest that have not been particularly interesting, or Imager that have not been particularly interesting to this community. Now when you get to a GIF or an image, because GIFs work on these things, of course, and it's just an image file. When you get to a thing and it's got rain in the background, we can just play for the user rain. They start hearing it, and they can kind of go through the emotional experience of being surrounded by another sensory version of that image. And to me, that was just really exciting that you can get that for free. So
and that is important for the accessibility community, because a lot of times all they hear is that computer voice of
this is rain falling on concrete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so here you actually can get you can have the emotion of the person talking, and get that, they can feel that,
Yeah.
so, instead of that.
So especially useful for you guys that have content creators that are in your site, that are a part of your site in any way. I think that's really where we really get to help you guys out, because it makes your content creators really happy. But anybody that's hosting an image anywhere, we'd like to work with you. So.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Thanks. We'll do Q&R like on foot. Thank you.
Brandon.
All right. Get airplay up. Do you have to exit? Oh, no. There you go. Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon again, and I am a senior developer at MoveIt, and I'm going to be talking about scaffolding React apps with a tool called Hygen. So first off, why do we want to scaffold these apps? Well, if you've ever made a React app, there's a lot of boilerplate code that you have to add to get things started. Typically, I might copy some files from somewhere else in my project or somewhere on the web and spend time replacing things. And especially if you're using Redux, you will have a lot of things that you need to add to create any new components or functionality. So this is where Hygen comes into play. Hygen is an unopinionated code generator. You will run it from your command line whenever you want to create new files. And how this works is you will create some embedded JavaScript template files that the command line will parse, and with your inputs create the new files for you. It's got some nice utility things like input prompter and some casing helpers. And the other cool thing is you can use this for any project. It's not JavaScript specific. What Hygen is not, it's not a runtime build time code generator. It's not like Rails where you're going to build these massive model files and then somehow you have a project at the end of the day, which is nice if it works for you, but if you want to customize it, you kind of get limited by that. It's not a substitute for good coding practices. So if you have some functionality you're repeating in your app, I know it's tempting to just put it in a generator and not worry about it, but chances are you're going to want to change that in the future, so properly abstract that out to something else. Let's go through an example here. So from the command line, let's break this apart. So you call Hygen, you have a generator, and you have an action. Once you run that, in my generator files, I have an input prompt, which will ask for the name of my component. Let's call it hello world. From that, it will output this new file, hello world. Pretty straightforward. So let's look at my template file. So at the top, Hygen has this concept of a front matter, which will give it some meta information it needs to know where to put things. So this says I want to put my new file into my source components directory. I'm going to create a new directory using the variable name that I input at the start, and then have a name.js file after. In here, you have some pretty standard React stuff, and then voila, here's my new file here. And you can see where my variables mapped to new text over here. So how do you make these commands? You'll have a directory in your folder called templates. And then under that, you'll have the first level will be generators. And then at your second level, you'll have actions. And if you're ever in a new project and you want to see what your commands are, you can just type Hygen, and it'll give you a friendly prompt of the available actions that you have to you. So helpers. Case change helpers. Pretty simple. You just call H, which is like the Hygen library for doing things. You want to use the change case library, and I want to change my name to Pascal. So with that, if I wanted to call this, say I name my component hello world, all lowercase with a space, it can know how to change it to a new case. And this can be pretty useful if you want to have different cases for different situations within your project. There's a lot of support for like dot cases, camel case, Pascal case, hyphen case. If you can think of it, it's probably in there already. And you can even write custom cases if you so desire. The other thing is cool is code injection. So one thing I like to do in my React projects is I'll have an index file at the root, and that will simplify my imports everywhere and kind of give like a pseudo contract, so I'm not calling deep into my file directories from other components. So when you look at this, in our front matter, the first thing we do is we tell it we want to inject something into a new file. We have the target file we're going into. We have some line that we're looking for, so it knows where in the file to inject it. And then we can put a test here. And so if it sees this in the file already, it won't inject the new thing. And so here I'm just setting up a variable inside of embedded JavaScript. And then this is the import statement here. And then you can see that gets added to the file here. With the injectors, you have to have one for each separate block of code you want. So it also have a separate injector for my export at the bottom of my file. Okay, so we went through the basics. But with Redux, here's something cool we can do. I have all these template files over here. And you can see when I execute my command, I'm injecting all these items into my root actions, my root reducers. And I'm also creating an API file. I'm creating a Redux Stux file. I've got epics. I've got thunks. And it gives a really nice starting point for when you're starting a new Redux store. So you don't have to do all that copying and pasting on your own. Prompt. So here, if I want to make a new API call in my Redux store, I built this here. And so I have a list of things I'm looking for. Name of my component, what's the action name that I want to perform. I give it an endpoint, and I have a list of HTTP methods. And so we can see this running on the side here, what all the input is. And get my API endpoint, select my method, and boom, I just injected all of these items into the Redux store that I had already created. There's also some advanced features in here. I won't go over them, but this may interest you. If you want, you can have a generator that makes new generators, since it's just files. It's a bit esoteric to me to kind of think like 2 levels ahead, like what do I think that I think I'm going to need in the future? But if you're into that kind of thing, it can do it. It also can run a subset of your generator. So if you only want to run generate one file out of your big set, you can have some glob matching parameters that can do that. You can have a programmable interactive prompt. So the one I showed before, just you passed an array of things you were asking for. You can set up something more advanced that can run through scripts and things. From your front matter, you can also trigger shell commands if there's any extra work that you want to do that doesn't fit cleanly into that file generation, which is pretty cool. So we've gone over Hygen. Why should you use it? You want to save yourself the work of repeating tasks, doing things over and over again. It makes it much easier to create new components. It also encourages code consistency. If you have a few developers on the team, if you're giving them all the same starting point, then you're reducing the chances that someone is going to do things differently and make it harder for the project to be maintainable. Also, if you have a new team member that's coming on board, they can really easily look at the generators that they have available to them and quickly learn how to properly work in the structure of the project. So a few tips for getting started. The first thing is your generators get checked in with the rest of your code. These are things that will grow with your project as it evolves. It's not something you just write once and forget about it. I would advise writing a little bit of your project first before you start creating generators. Usually at the start of most of my projects, there's a bit of an uncertainty period where I'm figuring out how I best want to structure things and where everything should live. And I like to get over that hump before I start writing generators. The other thing is you can start small. Just copy some of the existing files you have already. Maybe put in a couple variables for where you want to put it in your directory structure, what your components' name are. You don't have to worry about making everything perfect to get started and get value out of this. The other thing is I would advise to favor having multiple generators instead of complex wizards. It's very easy. You looked, I have this command prompt and I can build this 10-step wizard that can account for every case that I could possibly do. No, don't do that. I think you're going to get overwhelmed with that. And the other thing is, since it's generating files, you can just get it 90% of where you need it to be, and then you can manually fix the things you need to after. So you don't have to know everything up front. And this can be useful even in small projects because it's so lightweight. It doesn't necessarily have to be this massive project for you to get value out of it. All right, that was Hygen. Any questions? Yeah, back there.
Yeah. Did you look at any competing tools, or could you compare Hygen to any?
Yeah, I did a little bit. The question was if I looked at any. So UMan is one of the big competitors on the block, and they have a very different model where your generators don't live with your code. You'd actually have to publish them, and then anyone could consume them, and that kind of slows down the velocity of how you could change your generators. The other tool I looked at was Plop, which is very similar to Hygen. It uses handlebars instead of embedded JavaScript for a templating engine. And if you prefer one over the other, I think they have similar functionality sets. But I know embedded JavaScript is preferable to me because it is still JavaScript. And you don't have to learn the new kind of programming language for handlebars. Were there any other similar tools that you had worked with? Cool. All right, any other questions? Let's go back there again.
Do you get any weird stuff with your IDEs when you're writing template files that have like these brackets and stuff in there, you know what I mean?
Yes, I do, definitely. And so there is like an embedded JavaScript formatter for that, but then you don't get all your nice JavaScript highlighting, or you can do JavaScript highlighting and then your brackets for your variables will get weird. So I feel like it should be possible for someone to write a formatting engine that could take both of those things, but I haven't found it yet. There's another question, yeah, over there. I've been using it for a few months on a new project that I've been doing, and I think I'm around I've got 3 generators, and each of them have 2 to 3 actions in them each. So pretty small right now, but it kind of covers the core of, components, Redux, and then your connected components. All right, anything? Yeah, right there.
If you're gonna start putting Hygen in a new project, is there an existing set of Hygen generators for pretty standard things like a new Redux action or something like that, or do you start from scratch with every project?
So I started from scratch with my project, partly because React, when you build a React project, it's so opinionated because there's a million different libraries you're going to plug in, and each has their own flavor of what you want to do. That being said, I think there are some community generators that people have built. So if you aren't as picky about how you want to structure your project, or even if you are, that could be a good starting point to get something and then modify them. Since, once you copy them, they are your generators, and you don't have to live with what someone else has built. You can modify it to suit your needs. All right, anything else? Cool. You can learn more at the Hygen website. I've got a repo, which I put these generators on. It looks like React, but it's not an actual React project, so you can't copy it and do stuff for you, but might be a useful starting point to you. And if you have any questions, you can email me at brandonwilson@moveit.com. Thank you all.
Awesome. Our next presenter is Daniel. He'll be talking about form states. I didn't realize your shirt.
I'm going to move this a little forward so I stand there. It's going to be...
Huh? You don't want to back it up.
No. There we go. Hopefully I can get this to work. I use a Windows laptop because back when I was a kid, a company named Apple told me to think different, but then that means I can't use AirPlay, so kind of goes with the territory. All right, is that everybody see that? And let me switch to... All right, cool. So my name is Dan, and I'm going to talk to you about a cool little library called FormState. It's a form library. But I really wanted this talk to be a little bit more than just about a form. I'm not trying to convince you to switch to a new form library. I'm not trying to evangelize form. It's a cool little form library. We use it extensively at our place. But what I kind of want to demonstrate is a little bit of choosing the right abstraction layer when we do a library selection, when we write libraries, when we write code. Because oftentimes, like when we're out there looking for a library, say we started doing React and we're like, oh man, this form writing's kind of clunky, right? I thought it might be easier, and so we start looking for a library. We often are attracted to and encounter libraries that what I call are the kitchen sink, right? These are libraries that give you everything. They're awesome, right? They promise the world to you. right? And sometimes they deliver, but that comes at a cost. So it might be a really cool library, but the cost might be 100 kilobytes a bundle size. What's that library? What do you call that library? Moment.js, right? We all know about Moment.js. Don't use Moment.js if you want, unless you want a 200K bundle size. Anyways, but the other cost that sometimes comes is like, hey, why not? Hey, if a library promises I'm going to write form, right, and it's going to magically go through all my code, and it's going to find all the fields and subtly read my mind, and it's going to plop a form on the screen. I don't have to do anything. I'm like, awesome, let's do that. Let's use it, right? Except what's that hidden cost that comes later, right? Your boss, your manager comes, it's like, hey, we need this to work slightly different. We need this form field, to kind of, we don't, we're like, and you're like pushing back. It's like, no, because this is what our form library wants us to do, right? And so we run into that cost. So we start fighting that library. And to be fair, a lot of these libraries do have escape hatches, right? And ways that we can customize them and do kind of get to bend them to our will, right? But sometimes these kind of things are clunky, right? We got it, it's going to take like 10 render functions you got to pass in. You got to wrap it in 5 layers of high order components, wrap some containers around things. And, we all know, we've all been there, right? So as I'm going to show you this library, which I think is an example of somewhat of a lower level library, but that still gets you quite powerful. I want to just keep these things in mind. This is a topic that I could talk on for just the whole hour, but I just want to keep that in the back of our head about how a library can enable us to use the knowledge we already know to build that. Because what we want to do is step back a little bit and ask ourselves, what are we looking like? If I had problems doing forms in React, and I've encountered some difficulty or not difficulty necessarily, but just a lot of boilerplate or things that are unpleasant, right? What was it that was actually unpleasant, right? What is it that when we're looking for a form library, what is it that we want the form library to do? When you're looking at for a routing library, what is it that we're trying to actually have it solve for us? And that's true from forms, routing, state management, right? So step back, kind of analyze, hey, what do I actually, before you start actually even looking for a library, step back and say, hey, what would I love a library to solve for me? And then if you can define that and you can find that narrow enough and you can go and find a library that does just that and it does it well, you're gonna have a much better developing experience in the long term. It might be a little bit more involved in the short term, but just a much more awesome experience in the long term. So this is just an example, and we're gonna do a little bit of coding. So I don't know, hopefully, if we're getting, that's like, hey, maybe that will work. I don't know if you can still hear me. I'll try. It'll probably fall off. All right. So I asked, like I said, we want to ask ourselves, what do we need a form library to do for us? Anybody want to just take a stab? Like, what are we asking for a form library to do? Validation. Perfect. Yeah, a form library should do validation. What else? Like might we want a form library to do? I could just do on change, and what's the point of a form library?
More form elements out of less code?
Maybe, and we'll talk about that. But what I would say a form library needs to do is manage the form state, right? The state of the form, which is not just our data, but it's all the other data that comes that I don't want to be messing with what's validating and what's not validating, and is the form dirty and all that stuff. So it's form state. We mentioned being able to do, visual, how to use components to move forms. But I would posture that we don't need a form library to do that. We have this wonderful tool called React that helps us build reusable components that we can easily build a high-level component that does the perfect form that we want, and it's not that hard, right? Sometimes we forget that it's not that much code that we have to write to get the form component. And so we'll just run through a little bit of code here just to demonstrate some of the basic features. This is not an in-depth on this library. But just keep those things in mind. So we said that, and everybody can see that okay? So we said, okay, first of all, we have some form state, right? So let's create a function really quick that will create us the state for a blank form, right? It's just a function here that we're going to write. And this is going to return, and then we're going to say, what do we want the form to say? Username, why not, name, and this is just a blank form. So this is just plain state, right? And age. All right. So this is great. This is the state I want out of my form. This is my fields, right? My field state, and they're initially blank. But where's all this other state that I mentioned? Hey, I need to know if my form is valid, right? You mentioned validation, right? I need to know if my form has been touched. Is it clean? Is it dirty? Is it, what's the state of my form? And that's what the aptly named form state library gives us. So we can just wrap our state in a single class called form state. That's provided by this form state library. And that is what gives us the state, adds the state that we're talking about. Hey, is it validating? Is it valid? Is it invalid? Has the user interacted with the form and so forth? So that's what this form state adds to our object, right? And of course, we want to do that at the field level too, right? Because we want to know if a particular field has been touched, has been edited or not. So we're going to then wrap a field state object on our data, basically. And right now I'm just making a blank form, but that empty string could be your initial form values that you want to initialize the form to. So if you're doing a CRUD application, it could be the values that you got from your server side. All right, so we wrap that. Whoa. Somehow I went way too far down. All right. And it looks right. Okay, all right, so these two classes, form state and field state, are it. They are the whole forms framework that you interact with. And in fact, this form state library is not really React specific. It's just manage the state of the form, right? The only interaction you have is you can tell it when the data changes, and it will figure out your state. It will validate things for you and all that stuff. But you can use it with Angular. You could use it with jQuery, plain JavaScript, anything that you can tie an on-change handler to and set a value to will be able to use this form library. So, of course, we're in React, so let's create a React component to see this in action. So we're gonna, let's see, export. That's my basic form. And we're just going to make a functional type component. And how does this library tie? How is this library going to update our state in React? Well, this library is actually using a state management library called Movex that hopefully I give a talk about at a later date. But that's the only thing that ties. There's no higher order components. There's no React anything. In fact, the way it's tied to React is not even the form state is not actually providing that. It's Movex React Lite is what's providing that. And all we have to do is basically it's a single high order component, which we just wrap around. It's just called observer. And what that does is it makes our code react to those changes that are coming in the form state. So that's it. Once we have that, we are now tied to that library. All right, so what do we? So we need to have a place to put a form. So we're going to create just a quick state here, use state, and we're going to call our function to initialize it with a blank form. All right, so now we have our form, and now we're going to write our actual form code here. And this is just going to be, I'm going to start with the boilerplate stuff, so we're just going to do some inputs here. And what do we have? So we have username, right? And we're going to put a placeholder there. This will look amazing, I think. And then we're going to do, let's see, another, whoops. We're going to do another one for name. And then we're going to do a last one for, I hate small keywords, but we'll get by. And what was it, age? And age, we're going to, we can make it, we'll just leave it like that for now. All right. So notice what this is. This is a standard form. I'm just binding the value, but notice form.$. What is this weird $sign here? Well, the $sign is just a namespacing, just so that you can name your fields whatever you want. It won't conflict with, if you want to name your field valid, right? It won't conflict with valid on the form. So it's just all your stuff is under the $sign. Pretty simple. And so I type form, so that's the form I created, is that object that we created. And then I do $sign and name, so each field has a name just from the object. So name, and then value is one of these things provided by the field. So we're binding the value, and then the field provides you an on-change. Pretty straightforward. You then take your event and feed it to the on-change. I feed it event target value. And I think this should be good to go. Let's take a look really quick.
Your state. Yeah, you spelled it from.
Oh yeah, form. Where is it at? Oh yeah, nice catch. I'm just testing you guys. Again, small keyboard. All right, so that looks amazing, right? This is the best form ever, right? And I mean, this can't do much. So I mean, I can type in it. That's not useful. So where's all this other form state? So of course, that form state is in that object. But just so we can see it, let's just copy this pre-made, wonderful. And I warn you, this is going to also look amazing. And we'll see what that looks like. And so there is the object, the form state object. So this form state object, this JSON you're seeing, is what that form state library provides. And of course, I can, if I start typing the username, you can see the username value there change, right? Now you see that dirty is true, has been validated as true, and so forth. And again, so it reacts to changes as I type the form. But you notice I didn't have to do a set state or anything like that. So, I mean, it's a little bit of help, right? But I mean, there's still quite a bit of boilerplate here, right? We don't want to write that. But like I was saying, luckily, we have a great tool, React. It has this thing called components that we can take our boilerplate and encapsulate it so we can reuse it easily, right? So again, I suck at CSS and all that. So let's try to do something. Bootstrap has some stuff I can use, right? Like it has this form group stuff. Okay, so let me try to build tie my form, make it a little more standard Bootstrap. I could use material, whatever, it doesn't matter, right? So let's create, some of these other form libraries, maybe if you use Formic or something, they provide you a field component that's like, okay, cool. But then if you want to modify it, then that's when you have to start passing in the render functions and doing stuff like that. So instead of that, we're just going to take the form state and just create our own component. And that may sound daunting, but I want to show it's pretty straightforward, right? And so let's see. I would say I call it my field, right? And I'm going to pass some parameters to this. I'm going to pass it a form field, right? I'm going to pass it. Maybe I'll pass it an ID, and I'll pass it like a type, which will default to text if you don't pass it in, and then a label. This is the label we want to have it show, right? And we'll do that. And again, just so this responds to any changes, I'll wrap the high level observer around it. And then we'll just do some standard Bootstrap. I don't know if you're familiar with Bootstrap, but it's got a form group. The form group takes the ID for your field. So let's put the ID there. Let's add a label here. And this is the label we passed in, right? Did we pass it in? Yep. And then finally, the control. So I realize my indentation is all screwed up, but that's fine. And so the control, I can be a type. I'm saying we're defaulting to text, but you could pass a number or another type. Let's see. The value is where am I going to pull the value? Well, that's in the form state in the field, right? So I'm just going to do field dot value, and then the not a function. Okay, and the on change. This is going to be provided for me. So I go field dot on change. And I pass it e.target.value, right? All right, perfect. So I have made just a plain old Bootstrap form group. And so let's hook it up to so instead of doing all this, so we're going to do capital form, which is the Bootstrap one. And then we're just going to use our field that we made. So what did we say? We said the ID would be like, say, username, right? And notice that all I'm passing here is the field, the whole field. So I passed it in form.$username. So that's what goes in there. And the label, this is what we want to show, and we'll show username : or something like that. We can do this really quick, do name here. This will be form.name, and then we'll say name. And then we'll just do age, and we'll say, oh yeah, age was a type equals number. And the field, this will be age, right? Okay, so we got, so there's some red there, but I don't know where that's going. I think I'm missing a parentheses, all right? That looks awful, but okay. So let's see what we got now. Hopefully we got something better. And this is beautiful. This is pretty good, says the developer, and watches some of you UX and design guys cringe a little bit. But it's definitely better than what we had before, right? So, okay. So again, we got the basic form. This works just like the other one, and I mean, I'll leave it as an exercise to the reader about what you can do with those values and so forth. But one more thing to talk about, right? Validation that was brought up. How do we do validation within this framework? Because what use is a form framework if you can't do validation? So let's do that as the last thing. And how do you do validation? Well, you go back to the field definition. So this is back again where we're creating our form state, right? Because validation is part of the state of our form, right? So, okay, so it's pretty easy actually. You just do .validators. So you just chain it at the end of a field definition. And then you give it a list of validators. And what validators are provided by form state? And the answer is none. It gives us no validators. So that sucks, right? Awful. Like, what are we going to do without validators? Well, in fact, what it gives us instead is a really easy way to define a validator, a very intuitive and easy way to do it. And so it's a very simple API, so I just put required there, but all it is a function. So I do a function required. It takes the value that I need to validate, and what it wants me to do is tell me, hey, if you don't like this value, tell me what's wrong with it. That's the basic API, right? So we said this is required. So, well, if you don't give me a value, so not value, well, let me prefix that. So if you don't give me a value, right, I'm going to say, well, this is required, right? And that's a validator. That's all there is to a validator. I just created a validator. Now, of course, if you like to use a validator function and you're a fan of Yup, or there's a lot of different validations, or you have some more complex validation, you're free to call that from this function, this function, or create a function that wraps them. The API is so simple that anything can plug into, because you can turn everything into a, hey, tell me, is this valid or not? And if it's not, what's the error message that I should show, right? And so in the interest of time, I'm going to go into my little oven where I have the pre-baked validators so that we can just see a little bit of a sampling of other validators you might write. And it's interesting because we had a lot of developers use this library. And initially they think they're going to go to a valid, have to have a validation library. But they find it so easy to write these validators that they just end up writing custom validators. And they're usually much more specific to what they want. They have better error messaging and so forth, because they can write them specifically to what they need to validate and how they need to model that validation. So here's an example. This one's another easy one. Is adult. Hey, we're going to give you the value. I'm going to say, hey, if you're not 18, I'm going to tell you no kids allowed, right? Now this one's interesting, this min length here, because it's not a validator. It's a function that returns you a validator, right? So we're doing a little functional composition here. And so this one, I can pass it a min value, and then it will return a function. So this is returning an arrow function, right? That when you take a value, it's just going to check the length. If it's less than what we specified, we're going to tell you, hey, it needs to be at least min characters, right? So it's dynamic messaging. That's cool. So we are able to implement dynamic messaging with it. And then finally, async validators. Yeah, these are always important to have. In this case, I'm simulating checking to see if there's a unique username on the server, right? So the contract for validators are that it can return either a string if there's an error, or it can return a promise to a string. So basically anything you can do async, you can now return that as a promise, and it will work. So in this case, I have a unique username. I have a little, this is a .NET application, so it has a little controller with API username exists. I pass it a username. It just checks the, just a constant array there, just to simulate checking a username. Obviously, you could hit the database or do whatever. All right, so let's just hook these new validators that we just created here up to our form. And so this one, we're saying, hey, the username should be required, but it should also be a unique username. Awesome, so there we go, unique username. Now you can put as many validators as you want. And one of the features that it has is it will try to run all your synchronous validation first, so that you avoid those trips to the server if they fail. Now, you can get around that by just doing what, you can make them all async and do sync or async, or you can have a validator that runs multiple validators, all up to you, right? The framework is just gonna run your function and return the value. So this one, we're gonna say this one is also validators. This one's also required. And let's say this should be min length of at least, let's say 10, right? So that's a validator. And then this one, it's an age. So let's say validators, we want you to be is adult, right? All right, so a lot of changes, little Vim there. Okay, so we have the validators, we define them. How do we see, we need to actually display this validation. Luckily, Bootstrap gives us a pretty easy way to do that, and we're just going to use the normal bootstrappy way. So Bootstrap wants to know, it has a little check mark and a little X, right? A red X and a green check mark. So the green check mark shows whenever you tell it, like, there's a property here is valid. And how do we know if it's valid? Well, we can check the field. If the field doesn't have an error, right? So if field doesn't have an error, we're going to say, hey, yep, it's valid. And it is invalid, so they have these as separate. They're not just opposite. Well, if the field has an error, we're going to show it's valid. And now we need the last little piece. So that just does the little X and the little check mark. We need to show the error message to the user. So React has Bootstrap has a for control feedback that you can give it a type of invalid, and it will auto hide and stuff like that. And here we're going to just put the field.error. So field.error is just that string that we return, right? And so we're taking advantage of truthy checks or whatever to say, hey, do we have that string or is it null, right? So that's how the is valid, is invalid, and so forth works. All right, so we set that up. I think we can check to see. Hopefully it works the first time after it all right, okay. So now we see that little check mark, but I immediately don't like this behavior, right? Like, I haven't typed anything into this form. It's already telling me that I'm validated. So, hey, let's tell what we actually mean. So if I go back to here, well, it's valid. It's not really valid if it doesn't have an error. It's only valid if it doesn't have an error after validation, right? So we can easily do that. We say, okay, well, field has to have, we want to make sure that it has been validated. And it doesn't have an error. All right, so let's see that. Now if it can, I didn't hook up hot module reload, so it's a little bit clunky here. All right, so perfect. Now we don't have those check marks if we haven't typed anything yet. So let's try putting JDoe was one of those names that should conflict. So let's type JDoe and test our validation. And username, so it worked, right? But it took a little bit of time to validate, right? So that's the behavior I don't quite like. Like, well, there it tells me it's required, and I type JDoe, and it's like, eh. So it'd be nice to have some feedback, right? That we're going to the server and we validate. So we like spinners, right? So let's add one really quick. So here I'm going to just stick it right by the label here, and I'm going to say, well, if the field is validating, we're going to do a spinner. And I think I need a closing brace there. And so let's try this again. All right, so we got our form. We got JDoe. Now we got a beautiful spinner, and I'm sure that UX practices say that's the best place to put a spinner. But hey, we're making progress, so it works like we want to. So let's actually try. All right, so we try a different name. Okay, cool. So that validation works. Now we got the little check mark, right? So let's try Ernie. Oh, no, it needs to be 10 characters. Okay, so I want to have it per name. All right, cool. So now that works. And then age, if we put 2, no kids allowed. Okay, so let's put the right age of 20. Okay, perfect. So that's it. I mean, it's not really meant to be an in-depth illustration of form state. It's just meant to kind of make us think, hey, if we define the state of a form, or we have that concept, that model, and that's all it is, right? There's no magic. It's just a JSON file with things gives us facts about our form. And then we have wonderful tools and abilities that we already know because we do React, right? So we know how to do a conditional, and we know how to do this, and we know how to make a component. And so at the end of the day, this is what I ended up with, right? And this was, 10 minutes that it took us to do this. And so I have a pretty functional form library, and I'm able to tweak the behavior. And I could, we could go over, but we've had this in many applications. We've done a lot of admin UIs, which have a lot of CRUD and a lot of forms, a lot of dynamic forms, a lot of nested forms and stuff like that. Our developers have had no problem kind of figuring out how to do that and how to always, when the manager comes in and says, hey, we need to work differently, they can do it, right? So like I said before, this is not about trying to sell you on this particular framework, but really think about trying to see, like, get to the essence of what it is you need a library to do for you, because often, sometimes less is more, right? Because basically, when you let the library do everything for you, you're losing like control, you're losing power, right? And sometimes that's what we want, but a lot of times we think we're losing more than we actually are. And actually the power, all the learning we've done to learn React and to learn other frameworks and to learn these tools, we want to be able to leverage that power. So that's just a thought I wanted to put out there, and that's it. But I'm happy to entertain any questions. Yeah.
Does that avoid asking when you want validation?
Yes. So it's basically by default it just does a validation on change. Right? Again, it's not doing any events. The library is completely agnostic to you even having a form, right? So basically, the only interface is on change. You give it a value, and you can pull values out, right? So by default, it will validate on change, but you can definitely turn off auto validation, right? And then you can say enable it when you want. So you can do. So they have a feature. So basically, I can say on any of this. On any one of these, I can do disable auto validation, right? And then maybe on my code, then I'll say on blur, there's a method you can call, say, hey, and validate. You can just call validate whenever you want. So if you turn it off, you can validate whenever you want, right? Or what's more common is, a very common pattern is they have an on blur, when you put an on blur handler and you say, hey, enable auto validation and validate. So, hey, the first time you blur, it will validate and then enable for subsequent validation. On their webpage, they have a lot of examples of different. It's pretty amazing, actually, because when I first look at this library, I'm like, ooh, it doesn't do much. It's like, this is going to be hard. Like, do I really, we were looking for a very lightweight, we're already using Mobix, so that the library, even with Mobix, is probably comparable to, say, Formic, probably a lot less than Redux Forms, right? Redux Forms is very heavy. But so if you're already using Mobix, then the library adds like a 1.1K or something. So that was really attractive for our case. But I was worried about that. Hey, this is not doing a lot. But I was surprised with just how little work it took to get it to do exactly what I wanted, codify it into a component, and now it's like my life is simple for the rest of the year, right? So that's kind of why I wanted to bring that up and to realize that sometimes just a little bit of work will get you the perfect library that you need, rather than having to try to bend some other high-level library to do your will, where it wasn't really designed and it's kind of clunky, right? Sometimes it's just easier to write it yourself. Obviously, not all the time. Developers can take that too far too, but right? Any other? Okay.
Thank you, Daniel. Brooks? You're going to be coding too?
Yes, thanks. Feel free to stand up and stretch or get another drink or taco or whatever. I know we've been sitting down for about an hour, so this is usually when I start falling asleep. So feel free to take a couple of seconds while I figure out how to do the airplay thing. Which one is it? Roberto. Which one do I get on? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So you used to put the Wi-Fi with your Wi-Fi.
Oh, should I be on a different Wi-Fi?
Yeah, members. There you go. The Capital Factory members.
Thank you.
And here's the password.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
Hi, Texas.
Oh, Texas. Okay.
And it's Austin ACL. I don't know what
Austin Salemos.
So great solution. We still want to know
Okay. What's the code for this?
It's on the board. Oh, 9516.
Thank you.
We're either like too short on food. We're never, yeah.
Yeah, one or the other.
It's always one or the other. A lot of food, not not enough to drink. Think we're at the not enough to drink stage.
It's a hot night. 100 degrees today. Well, if you know how much it is, I mean, you sent me a photo. I don't know. All I did was.
All right, I'm going to be getting started in just a second here. So if you want to find your way back to your seat. Sorry, I know it was a short break. I have a niece watching who it's past her bedtime apparently, so trying to honor that. But she's not going to understand any of this, so it's okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So the name of my talk is Stop Worrying and Start Mutating Your State. So if you've ever used Redux, I hope that this is at least interesting and you don't start, I don't know, stoning me yet. But basically the goal of this talk is to encourage good state management. I really like state management. I talked a couple months ago at this meetup, and I talked about using context for state management, so it's definitely something I'm interested in. But I specifically want to help people get out of kind of spread hell. If you're not familiar with that, I'll go over an example of what that is, and just help make state management a little bit easier at a really, 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 really low cost. Because I really actually don't like learning APIs that much. There's, I feel like every project you have to know like 20 different libraries already. So want to try and minimize that. Who am I? What's up? Oh, louder? Okay, cool, thank you. I'm Brooks Librand. I work for a company called Business Laboratory. We have a really terrible website. I didn't make it, but you can look at it if you really want to find out what we do. It's descriptive, I guess. I'm also on Twitter, and I have 85 followers, so, getting up there. I think I had 40 2 months ago, so at this rate. So, cool. So, how do we manage our state in React? There are these 3 principles. Can everyone see this? Is this good? Okay, great. There are these 3 principles that are just really tried and true to be pretty good state management principles. You should have a single source of truth. It means that for every piece of state, there's one canonical owner of that state, so maybe your foreign library or whatever. Or maybe Redux, or who cares. State should be read-only. You shouldn't be mutating your state. It should be read-only, and then changes should be made by pure functions, and that goes into that immutability thing. I didn't make these up. These come from React Redux. Well, I mean, they really come from Flux, and they come from things way before that. There's a long history that I can't go into now, and also I don't know the full history of. So if you want to read more, definitely just read the React Redux docs. They're actually really good. Just as a philosophical kind of thing. So that's kind of the main things of what you want to do to maintain good state management. So immutability, it's good for a lot of reasons. Hopefully everyone kind of knows that, and I don't have to convince anyone. If I do, just come talk to me later. But long story short, basically, if you mutate something, it's really hard to know what mutated it and where it happened. It's really hard to go backwards. So it's not very good. Also, React won't know when things mutate necessarily. Like if you mutate something, React thinks, hey, that's the same thing. That array has the same memory address, because React's not going to look at, it's not going to do a deep look at all your objects. That would be really expensive and rather silly, because we could just keep things immutable. But here's the problem. Spread hell. I mean, hopefully your state isn't this deeply nested, that's the word. But sometimes it is, and just sometimes it has to be an object inside an object inside an object inside of an object. I've gotten really good at writing this kind of code, but I also still really hate it, and no one can ever understand what's going on when I share this with someone, and it's not because they're bad developers, it's because this is confusing. So what else is out there? Okay, well, there's a cool library, and there's many other libraries like this called Immutable. And it's this was created by a guy at Facebook, I can't even remember who. But basically, it's these collections. They're written in JavaScript, but they're these collections of immutable. There are immutable collections, so like a map and a set and things like that, which is really cool. Problem with them is you have to know an API, which I said I don't really want to learn another API. And it's just to convert from JS to JS, you have to, like, you don't ever know kind of which place you're in without checking, and that can be kind of annoying, and then you have to convert them, and that's actually kind of expensive to go back and forth. So it's fine. I've used it. They're kind of fun, but maybe we can do better. Okay, so we're gonna talk about mutating but maintaining mutability. Oh, that's a little slow. I'll try not to switch back and forth too much by using this this little demo thing I made. So basically, there's all these cards, and they all have a QR code. That's just to make it slow, to emphasize a point. Don't worry too much about it. And a little, like, checkbox of what do you like. This doesn't. Oh, that worked. Oh yeah, it doesn't work good. None of this works right now, which is good because we're gonna build it out. So the first thing, okay, well, how do I reverse a list? With that reverse one, we just want to reverse a list, right? Okay, so let me have a list. Let's just play around. I forgot how to reverse a list. Oh, well, that's convenient. Oh, looks like that reversed it. That's really nice. Thanks, JavaScript, for having a reverse thing. Okay, so I got my state. Hopefully you're familiar with what a reducer is. If you're not, don't worry, it's a switch statement. Okay, cool. I'm going to reverse this and type correctly and save, and you should refresh. Okay, cool. Uh-oh, that didn't work. Does anybody know why this didn't work? Go for it. Yeah, we just mutated the same thing. If I do my, sorry, I got really loud there. I just got really excited about mutating stuff. That mutated A, that's not good. We didn't get a copy of A. Okay, so what do we have to do? Ooh, spread hell. I mean, it's just one spread. We can handle that, right? This isn't a big deal. And we're gonna refresh. Oh, it works. Okay, cool. It's not that bad, but I mean, really, like, that's kind of annoying. And also, I can tell you, junior developers don't know this. They're going to mutate stuff all the time. At least that's my experience. Maybe I'm just a bad teacher. Probably true. But this is the case that we're running into. All right, I'm not gonna write this whole thing out because that would be silly, and you're about to see why. Oop, I'm spoiling things. Don't look. Yeah. Oop, I didn't copy it. Turns out you have to hit Command-C. Sorry. I know it's really fun to watch someone copy and paste something during a code demo. Okay, so we got this thing working now. Oh, good. All right, so this is working, but this is also, geez. Sorry, I'm going to have to zoom out. This is getting a little bit confusing. I'm not sure why this didn't, I think it just didn't reload. Cool. So it works. That's great. But I mean, look at this thing. I had to zoom out just to show you it all. This is actually rather painful. I'll zoom back in so we can actually go through a little bit of the code. I'm not gonna spend too much time on it. I have the repo up, or I'll post the notes so everyone can see. Basically, to set an item, we have to get the ID, we have to find the index of that item, we have to get the item, we have to get the options, we have to get the specific option, we have to create a new option by doing that spread thing, and then say the option is the value of the opposite of the option, and then we create a copy, and then we splice. That's a mutation, so that's why you had to copy, because splicing, basically, if you're not familiar, you give it an index, and then you say, how many elements do I want to delete? 1 in this case, and then we give it a new copy of something. We have to do all that just to say that. Okay, and then to reset the options, it's a little bit better, but I mean, this is, no one's going to know what this is off the top of their head. I'm using a reduce, which like is, reduce is cool, but it's also always confusing when you do silly things like I do, like change an array to an object. And so we're doing all this crazy stuff, and we're going through every one. And check this out. Also, if you haven't used the new React profiler, you should. It's cool, and I'm going to show you how. Okay, so we just changed 2 things. I'm going to start profiling. I'm going to click Reset Preferences. I'm going to stop profiling. I'm going to click this. These are all the items. Every single one of those re-rendered. That's unnecessary. I changed 2 out of, I think there are 10, and every single one re-rendered. I'm also memoizing all of these because I've got that expensive QR code thing going on. This took 235 milliseconds. That is way too long. It is in dev mode, but it's still too long. That's going to cause your app to be glitchy. Okay, so let's do better. Let's just mutate all this. That's what I say. So we're going to import something called produce from a little package called immer. Immer, I think, means always in German. I don't know. If you know German, please correct me later, not right now. It's created by a guy who works on, oh shoot, I think ReactJS. I don't remember actually. Who works on something. You should look up the docs and then you'll see it. He's a really, really smart guy and figured out how to use this cool thing. So really all that immer gives you, or all that I care about that immer gives you, is a little function called produce, and it's just a wrapper function. And the cool thing is we can wrap it around, and this still works. Nothing is actually changed yet. So no API, and we still have a working thing. So what do we actually do? Okay, so what immer does at a high level is basically it's a wrapper over like a callback like we have here. You could actually just give it the state and then a callback, either one. And what it allows you to do is it gives you a draft of your state, and you can directly mutate that draft, and then it'll give you a new version of your draft, which is super cool. Don't worry if you didn't catch that, because let's just see what happens. Let's just play around. Okay, so we got our state, and remember how I said this was a mutation and it didn't work? Right? Yes? Yes. Cool. Wow, it worked. We just mutated it, and it worked. Without immer, without that produce, that didn't work, but for some reason we can now just mutate state directly, and it worked. That's really cool. Okay, that's not that compelling. So let's try this one. Okay, well, I want to get the option. I've got my state. There's this nice function called find.id equals ID. Hopefully everyone knows how to do kind of that much. Then you get these options, and then inside of that we need to get the actual option that we got from the action. Okay, that gives me my option. That's great. So what do I want to do? I want to change it to the opposite of what it was. Let's just delete all of this. It looks really ugly. And let's just say, I don't know, that. Oof, didn't like that. Oh, well, okay, new option, sorry. I don't need to actually return anything. I just need to stop going through the switch statement. Oh, that's not good. Because I can't spell. Yeah, live coding is always hard. Okay, cool, that worked. So we just took out like 10 lines and replaced it with 2, effectively. Yeah, that's cool. I like that. What about this guy? How do we do this one? Okay, well, usually you use map creates a new copy of an array, right? Every time. Well, we're not mutating, so we don't actually need a map. I am going to break still. We could just maybe go through each of them. Oops. For each, and then item dot options. Well, we want to get the values of those because it's an object, and then for each of those, we could just go through, and each option, we just want to change the value to be false. So I mean, yeah, that's kind of one line. I could break that up, I guess, but I don't know. It seemed pretty easy to read to me. Oh, okay, cool, it worked. Let's profile that. This took, that last one took 235 milliseconds. Oh, you actually have to click the profile button. No one tells you that when you're doing these things. Oh, cool, that took 47 milliseconds. That is an eighth of the time. And the reason is because it didn't render every one. So that's another cool thing that Emory gives you out of the box. When you mutate things, it's using proxies under the hood, and it knows exactly which ones you changed and which ones you didn't. So even though I actually overrode all those as false, it's keeping track, and it's saying, okay, well, if it was already false, I'm not gonna recreate an object and give him a new object. I'm just gonna give him the last one that we had. But for the ones that did change, those 2 that did change, that's gonna be a new object because we still want that immutability. We still want that those pure functions. And so that's the real bread and butter of what this is. That's what immer is. It is not. It's allowing you to mutate your state, but not really. It's allowing you to do it in a pure way. Here's the thing about pure functions. I should have explained this at the beginning. If you don't know what a pure function is, no big deal. All it means is that for any arguments that you give it, it should always return the same output. So a sum function, that's a pure function. Also, it shouldn't perform any side effects, so don't connect to a database kind of thing. You can mutate stuff inside of a pure function as long as you always give the same output for the same inputs. So that's what Immer is actually doing. It's allowing us just to do the mutations, but it's still a pure function, and that's super cool to me. So why is Immer awesome? Immer is awesome. Well, first of all, I've got this cool diff, and this just kind of shows you what we just did, which I think that's pretty cool, that we just cut all of that, and it was faster. This is more understandable. The people on my team are going to understand what I'm talking about, and they're not going to be like, why are you reducing an array into an object? Immer is really awesome. It's tiny. It's 4.4 kilobytes gzipped and minified. That's about twice the size of React, but like an eighth of the size of React DOM. So if you're using React, this is already like way smaller than what you're already using. It's smaller than even like React Redux, which is also a small library. So it really doesn't have a huge footprint. It's just one wrapper. There's not an API to learn. There are some other things in it, but I don't even know how to use it. They're very like corner case things, so don't even worry about them, in my opinion. You can if you want. But you just write regular JavaScript. I love that. I love it when a library lets me write regular JavaScript. That's why I really like React. And React doesn't even totally do that because you got JSX in there. But besides that, it's regular JavaScript kind of. But this actually is. And it allows you to write mutable code as pure functions, which is really cool because mutations aren't bad in and of themselves. They're really great in the right context. It's also it's fast enough for every case. Your slowdown point is not going to be your reducer. Your slowdown point is going to be pretty much every time is the DOM updating. I have one time since using Immer purposefully not used it and did a spread health thing because we were doing a deep comparison like every time something changed, and so in that case I needed it to be as fast as I possibly could be, so Immer was not the best use case for that. Every other time Immer's always been great. And it'll give you performance boosts sometimes. Auto freezing out of the box, all that means is that if you try to mutate, if you do actually try to mutate an object outside of that produce function that was produced by the produce function, it'll yell at you and say don't do this. So that's kind of nice. So there's a bit of safety around that. And it makes your life easier. It makes life easier for every developer. I initially downloaded this because I had a junior developer who kept on mutating state, and I kept on getting mad at him, and he kept on doing it anyway. And so I decided, okay, well, we're going to try this thing out. And then I ended up loving it and used it all the time and tell people to use it all the time now. I mean, not all the time, but a lot of times. If you want to know more, just read the docs. It's an article, basically. They're very easy to understand. You'll learn more about it than you wanted to, and you'll learn about proxies, which I didn't even know what they are. I actually don't even remember what they are, but they're really cool, and I knew at one time. Also, the guy who made it wrote this article introducing Immer Immutable the easy way. Read that. And the rise of Immer in React, Netlify, someone at that produced this, and it goes over like that whole, it talks about immutable JS from what I remember, and it talks about this kind of history. So if you want a little bit more of that, that's a really great article to read. So that's everything. Once again, I'll post the link to this repo on the meetup, so don't worry too much about that, but you can look up Brooks Librand on GitHub. Pretty sure there's not another one, so you should be able to find me. But yeah, any questions? Yep, yeah, it totally was. I can actually pull up the Immerlist version. Yeah, so what we had to do to check each of those is we had to do that map. And so then automatically the array is now new. But even inside of that, each of these items, yeah, it's returning a new one every time, even though we weren't really changing something. We could have gotten away. We could have figured out a way to do this. It would have been a lot more work. Now, yes, I contrived a little bit the example to fit that, but I mean, I run into this every day at work. Every other day, let's be fair. Any other questions?
If you were going to like convert a large code base to start using Immer, could you wrap all your reducers in the, what was it called, produce?
Yeah, produce, yeah.
And then like over time, start converting them one by one to mutate instead of using spread everywhere?
Totally, that's actually absolutely what I did. We had a reduce function that was like 300 lines, which don't ever write that, don't ever do that. It should have been split up for so many other reasons. But that's what we did. I tried it first on that one as just a test, and I was like, this is amazing. And I started using it every time there was ever a case I could. And then when I got really bored, I would go back and refactor stuff for fun.
It's so easy to use, and I didn't even hit on this. It's not even a React specific thing. You can use this for whatever you want, just as long as you want to be able to like. I mean, I was talking to a coworker who's learning Node right now, and he's like, "Oh, this is great! Like this does what I wanted to do with a deep copy, but even better." And I was like, "Cool." So yeah, I hope that answered it. Any other questions? Yeah, I would really encourage you to read, if you're really interested in that, to read the docs, because they go into exactly how it does that, but that's basically how it does it. So it uses something called proxies, and basically, yeah, it's just kind of like recording what actually changed and what didn't, so that it can do this kind of fast lookup and figure it out. Because it's really fast. It's faster than Immutable.js, that library I showed. It's still not as fast as native, because you are iterating over stuff and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, something like that. Anything else? Cool, thank you guys so much. Definitely, yeah.
Thank you, Brooks. Is Robin? Robin doing a little bit of accessibility. Are you on the Wi-Fi?
I am, yeah.
And it's just ACL. So Austin.
Sorry, it just keeps changing on me. Okay, awesome. So let's talk about internationalization. So I wanted to come here today because I, next month, am going to a conference called React Boston, and so just wanted to practice here with y'all, so thank you for being my guinea pigs. My name's Robin. I work for a company called Talia. I do mostly React code there, and at Talia, we localize our app into 18 different locales. I've been just kind of learning about internationalization as I go, and I'm not an internationalization expert, but one thing I do have a lot of experience in is dealing with poorly internationalized code when I lived overseas. So a lot of us as English speakers, as Americans, we don't really know what it's like to have the internet not really made for us, because most websites are made for English speakers in mind, but there's a lot of people who are in other countries that are experiencing like this confusing and frustrating UI, which I experience on that. So that's why internationalization is something that's important to me. And so I wanted to cover the following things in this talk. So first of all, I just want to explain what is internationalization, how is it different from localization and globalization, and also why it's important. And then I'm going to go and talk about an internationalization framework that I use called React I18 Next. So we'll start with some React specific code, and then I'm going to go into some more like generic front end stuff, talking about common pitfalls and things to look out for when internationalizing. And can everybody hear me in the back? Okay, awesome. Okay, so what is internationalization? First of all, you might see this shorthand, this I18N. If you haven't seen that before, that just means that there are 18 letters between I and N. We call that a numeronym. You might have seen that for accessibility with that A11Y, pronounced as Ali. So it's the same with internationalization. Developers are laser. We like to shorthand everything. And same with localization and globalization. And just to kind of explain like what the difference is between those three words, internationalization, localization, globalization. Internationalization is what we do first with our application. So let's say we're starting an app from scratch and we're only going to support English at first. We can still internationalize that app. So that's the process of not hard coding our strings, our text, formatting our dates properly, things like that. And then as our app grows, we might want to support Spanish or add in German, and we can localize multiple times, but we ideally just internationalize once. So that's just the act of preparing for adding more locales in the future. So you can technically have an internationalized app that is only in English. And this entire thing is called globalization. So globalization is just like the umbrella term for internationalization and localization together. And another visualization that you could think of is like localization is just kind of what your users see on the surface, and internationalization is all the hard work that the developers are doing behind the scenes to support everything, the formatting of the dates, the changing of the currencies, things like that. That's what makes up internationalization. And I'm also going to be talking about something called a locale. And when I'm talking about a locale, the reason why I say that instead of language is because we don't often want to just support like an entire language. We might just have something like all of English, all of Spanish, all of French, but oftentimes we want to support specific regions. So like French from Canada or Spanish is used in Latin America, and that those codes on the left, we call those BCP 47 language tags, and that's what any internationalization library is going to take as an input. And I'll talk about those later, but just keep in mind that when you internationalize, you're not always just supporting an entire language. You might be supporting a specific locale that is for a region, not necessarily the whole language. So now that you understand what is internationalization, I kind of want to talk about the why. So I know this is like kind of small to read the graph, but if you look here, like our English right here is super skewed. We have like 50% of English users, but the internet users by language, it's only about 25%. And this is like not just native English speakers, this is just people who can communicate in English and use the web in English. So we have a huge amount of English on the web, but not that many English users. And if you look like Chinese is the second one, Chinese isn't even in the top 10. So if you're not internationalizing your application into these other languages, you're missing out on a huge user base. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, you know, that's great, but my app is local to the United States, or it's local to Austin, so I don't really need to internationalize. But the thing is you do. Even in Austin, we have a lot of people that don't speak English as a first language. And it's really easy to get in this English-speaking bubble where you think, okay, I go to the grocery store, everyone I interact with speaks English, but there's actually a huge percentage of people in Austin. 32% speak a language other than English, 12% speak English less than very well. So if your application is only supporting English and not Spanish and not other languages, you're only reaching out to a potential of 88% of your users. If your competitor is supporting those languages, you bet those other language users are going to use that language. And besides just like being smart on a marketing perspective and a money-making perspective, it's also just like a nice thing to do. I see a lot of push for accessibility, you know, like the people who came up earlier with the See Here application. And like, I can't go to a conference now with, I can't go to a conference now without hearing about accessibility, and that's awesome, but internationalization is also part of accessibility. We want to be inclusive. Internationalization is part of accessibility. It's part of reaching those users that might not be reached by your application nowadays. So just don't be the dude McDudebro guy that's, oh, why doesn't everyone learn English? Like, we should work to be inclusive and reach out to everybody. So you might think, okay, cool, well, I'll internationalize, but I don't really have the time, so I'm just gonna use Google Translate, and that'll be fine, right? And the answer is no. Again, I used to live in China, and I lived in Taiwan, and I had to use Google Translate a lot when I went on Chinese websites. And also when I went to restaurants to look at the menus, I would see things that were poorly translated. When you just use something like Google Translate, you end up with something like this. So you're gonna have like weird translations, like use the queen to invite powerful water. Your user's gonna see that and just be like, what does this even mean? And sometimes you translate unintentionally to something super inappropriate and you won't even know because you're just using Google Translate. So get actual translations when you're internationalizing. Okay, so I want to dive into an internationalization library. So the one I'm going to show you is called React I18 Next. It's the one that I chose for my company. There are lots of them out there, and they probably work pretty similarly. React I18 Next, one of the reasons I chose it over probably the other most popular internationalization library is called ReactIntel. And one of the reasons why I chose this one is because it's part of a larger ecosystem called I18 Next. I18 Next is just a JavaScript library. It supports Angular, Ember, React, Vue, and also some backend languages like Node, PHP, etc. So it's not just a React library. It's part of this whole entire framework. When you're looking at which internationalization library you want to use, you're probably going to have some similar features. So you're going to have standard features like pluralization, interpolation. But one thing I liked about I18 Next is it had other features like plugins to detect the user's language. When you always want to let your user select the locale that they want to use, but if you have, for example, a user that's there on their first time, and you don't know which language, you can use this plugin to detect the browser language. And they also have things for loading and caching the translation, so you don't have to reload them on every refresh. And then another thing I liked about I18 Next is that it was really flexible. You can kind of pick and choose which libraries you wanted to use, and it was scalable. It worked both for small applications and large applications. And when I was looking at ReactIntel, I found that it seemed like it worked better for larger libraries, and the API was a little bit confusing. Okay, so if you wanted to just start up your project, all you'd have to do is add two dependencies. I18 Next, remember that's the larger JavaScript ecosystem that React I18 Next is part of. And then you also need to add like the React flavor part of it. So let's say that we've done like a create React app. Sorry, I don't know why these keep saying that. Say we're doing a create React app and we have the boilerplate app. When we're setting up our translations, because we have a simple file, I'm just going to throw this all in just one JSON file. Obviously, as your application grows, you're not going to want to put all your translations just in these JSON files. But just for simplicity's sake, let's just say all I need for my app is just to show hello world. And I've got the English translation on top and the Spanish translation on the bottom. And then I'm going to set up a file. I'm going to pull in those translations from that file and import I18 and init React I18 Next from the React library. And all I have to do is initialize it with the resources, with the language, and you're good to go. Now all of your application has access to all those translations. And how you would do that is, so say you're still working with a class, you would pull in this thing called a with translation, and then you'd wrap your class at the bottom with this higher order component. So you'd wrap that, and then you would be able to get your translation function through props. If you are working with hooks, it's a lot easier, it's a lot cleaner. You just need to pull in the use translation function, and then you can get this T function. So the T function just means translate. This is what you're going to get in any internationalization library. So let's say we want to make that a little bit more complicated. Say we want to pull in some data and pass that into the string. We don't want to just show a static string. So I've updated my translation file, and now I can pull in a name. Sorry, I'm just going to try to reload this. Okay. So we've got our translations and we want to pull in our name. And then we go back to that functional component I had. And then all I have to do is pass in that object with name Robin into it. And so instead of saying hello world, now it says hello Robin. And then if you wanted to do other things, like if you wanted to change the language on that screen, instead of pulling T, you can pull this I18N object. And within that, on our button, we can just change the language there. And again, like this button, you change it in this button component, and then in all your other components will also update automatically. Okay, so that's kind of like the React specific stuff. So I wanted to go into some JavaScript stuff. So just some general front end things that you might come across when you're internationalizing your app. Translations are kind of the first thing that we think of, but probably the next thing are things like dates and times and numbers and time zones and calendars. So we have to deal with that a lot when we're internationalizing our application. First off, if I show a room full of Americans this date, 01/02/2019, most of those people are going to think, okay, that's January 2nd. If I go and show that to a British person, they're going to think that's February 1st. So that's here like a big reason why we need to focus on locales, not just on languages, because this date can be really confusing to a British person, or if you're on a British website and you see this date and it's reversed, you really want to specify like your actual, this is English from England, or this is English from the US, etc. And it's not even just day, month, year, or month, day, year. You also have year, month, day, and each country is going to have something different, and it's a lot to think about. And we also have times. So in the US, we like 12-hour times with AM and PM. In other countries, like in Europe, they like the 24-hour style clock. And then time zones are super, super frustrating. If anyone's ever worked with time zones, you can relate to this GIF. Time zones are frustrating because it's not even just the math of like converting one time zone to another. It's that time zones can be on the 30-minute mark. They can be on the 15-minute mark. Some countries observe daylight savings time. Some don't observe daylight savings time. Some countries that observe it, only part of the country observes it and part of it doesn't. And then the countries that do, sometimes they just up and decide to not observe it a week before daylight saving time, and nobody has any idea. So there's just a lot that comes into play when you're thinking about time zones. Calendars are also different. In the US, we start on Sundays. In the UK and other countries in the world, they start on Mondays. And some countries might not even use this type of calendar. They might use a lunar calendar, you don't know. Numbers can be different. So if I have the integer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.78, and I ask an American to format, they're probably going to format it like 123, 456, decimal point 78. If I ask somebody from India, they might format it like 1, 23, 456, decimal 78. And then someone in Europe, like from Spain, might swap the comma and the decimal point. And this is just 3 ways to format numbers. There's like quite a few ways, actually, countries will format their numbers. Percentages are different based on which country you're from. And then currency is different. Like you have, if you're in the US, you're obviously going to want to see something in US dollars, but if you're in another country, you're going to want to see your own currency. So how do you solve all these problems? Well, the main thing is like, don't try to do it yourself. There's just so much data that's out there. And even if you're thinking like, oh, well, we're only supporting English and Spanish from Mexico, so it's only 2 locales, so we can just do it on our own. That's just not scalable. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Don't try to solve all these problems. There are libraries out there that will fix that for you. And for dates and times, traditionally people use Moment.js. I know it's like a really bloated package, so we're kind of moving away and going into different libraries like Date, FNS, etc. There's actually a really cool GitHub called You Don't Need Moment.js, and it will let you kind of figure out which one works for you. Do keep in mind, I really like this one because it has things like time zone support. Again, time zones are like huge, and so if you're moving to something like Date, FNS, be careful that you might need a time zone library. Also, there is a JavaScript native API, so you could open up your dev tools and use this right now, and that's really cool. It's called Intel, and it has a lot of information. You can do things like formatting your list, formatting numbers. I've given you an example of how it is formatted some relative time using Spanish. So it formatted something -1 month, and it spit out hace un mes, which is really cool. Obviously, you don't want to depend on only this because it is browser dependent. So if you have like really old IE browsers you have to support, it's probably not going to be able to use this. But if you have a simple application, this is really handy. And then finally, I was just kind of curious like where all this information came from. And this is coming from something called the CLDR, the Common Locale Data Repository. And this is not something you're going to probably interact with directly. This is like under the covers of a lot of things, but this has like all your locale data, currency names, time zones, etc. I just found it interesting, like where is actually all this data stored? And then finally, just keep your communication open between your front end and back end teams if you separate those concerns. For example, I worked at a company before who sometimes the API would send a formatted date and sometimes it would just send a UTC timestamp and I had to format it. And that was really confusing, figuring out, should I format it? Is it already formatted? What kind of math do I have to do? What kind of timestamp it is? If you can, it's great to store dates in UTC, which if you don't know what that is, it's a coordinated universal time. It's not a time zone. It's just a standard that we've all agreed upon, like, hey, this is our like 0 mark. It doesn't observe daylight savings time. And so like we can say like it's 4 hours ahead of UTC or 8 hours behind UTC, et cetera. And then also with numbers, store them as integers and then format them on the front end. No need to format them in your databases. Okay, so the next thing that you might run into are non-Latin characters. So you might have seen like this sort of gibberish on your screen. If you remember like the internet in the 90s, you would see this everywhere. But if you're seeing something like this, it means that the website hasn't properly encoded their characters. And you also might have things like this where somebody has a character like Zoe has an umlaut. If you can't see that, that's like the 2 dots over the E. And when she enters her name in this form, it's telling her warning invalid characters. So this is, again, even if you're only supporting people in the United States, they might have non-Latin characters in their name. So just be cognizant that you don't want to tell them that their name is incorrect and that you can't store their name. So how you get around that is by setting your char set to UTF-8. You can do this in your meta tag, in your HTML. You can also do this with your HTTP headers. Also use Unicode if you can. Unicode has just all the alphabets that you need: Cyrillic alphabet, Arabic alphabet, Chinese characters, Japanese characters, emoji. It's got everything. So if you're using Unicode, you're not going to run into that like mumbled gibberish characters. And another thing is to be aware when you're sorting using those non-Latin characters. So if you store those and then you have to sort them for the user, you don't want to like have your sorting algorithm just do A through Z. And also be aware of what your regex is checking for. So with this example here, we're telling her that her name is invalid because we might have written some regex, something to invalidate her name. Just be careful like what you're looking for. You can like use Unicode in regex. Another thing that we run into is designing with only English speakers in mind. So, you know, most web developers, at least in the US, are probably English speakers, and your UX designers are probably English speakers, and therefore, some things like this might happen. You start and you build this out for an English user. You make a button and it says save. And then suddenly, you know, 6 months later, your PM comes to you and says, hey, we want to support Spanish. And you put in your translations and suddenly the text is overflowing. This happens a lot. So here's an example of the word views. So right here we have the English version, and you can see as it goes down and we get into German, it gets 3 times as long. And this happens a lot with German. With like the Asian languages, yeah. With the Asian languages like Korean and Chinese, it's pretty close to English, but yeah, as you go into other languages, sometimes it can be a lot longer and you need to account for that space. I found this like rule of thumb online and I thought it was pretty good. If your English text is less than 10 characters, leave room for 3 times the expansion. And if it's more than 10 characters, so it's like a big blurb of text, leave room for 30% expansion. And this is more of a UX thing, but it's still important to be aware of as developers. Allow for enough flexibility and space that your translated text will fit into your design. And when you're writing your CSS, just be careful that you're not using things like fixed widths. Make sure that your elements will grow and shrink as you add text or take away text. Okay. The next thing I wanted to talk about is right-to-left languages, and I don't have enough time to just like dive really deep into it, but I just wanted to give like a very brief overview of what that means to support right-to-left languages. So far, I've just mostly been talking about European languages or Asian languages, but I haven't talked about right-to-left languages like Arabic or Hebrew, and what that means to support a right-to-left language. So here's an example of a left-to-right website. And here's what it looks like in right to left. So you can see the Wikipedia logo is on the left side, and in Arabic, it jumps to the right side, and that nav bar is on the right side. And all your text starts on your right and moves to your left. There's a lot that goes into this. There's like an algorithm under the covers that will determine which way to display the text. So if you have like English text, then Hebrew text, and then like parentheses, and then Hebrew text, there's an algorithm that goes into figuring out how to figure out which way to go, because that can be really confusing. But on like the very easiest level, how you would accomplish this is by adding dir equals RTL to your HTML, and that will flip things for you, your tables, everything for you. Of course, you're gonna have to like probably figure out things like flipping your icons, which is something that a right to left user would expect. Be careful with your CSS when it comes to right to left. So if you're using things like float left and you swap it, that float left will stay on the left. So if you use things like flexbox, which has flex start and flex end, it's going to follow the way you want to. And you shouldn't be using flex and text align anyway. It's better to be using things like flexbox. And so this is going to follow the rules of right to left text. And another thing is just to make sure that when you are naming things, make sure you're naming them based on what they do and not what they look like. So say, for example, you have some pagination arrows. If you call them left, right, that makes sense in English. It makes sense in Spanish. It doesn't make sense in Arabic, because when you swap those, suddenly what is left is right and what is right is left, and it's just super confusing. So use words like previous, next, before, start, beginning, backwards, above. That's just better practice anyway. So some final things that I wanted to mention that didn't really fall under these categories. Make sure you are always adding a language tag to your HTML. And I've talked about a couple things that you might need to dynamically update. You can use something like React Helmet if you wanted to dynamically update your HTML in your header. Be careful with your routing. So if you are using like a Chinese language, for example, and you're dynamically adding routes, you can't have Chinese characters in a URL. That's just not going to work. So be careful with that. Be careful with your fonts. What looks good in English and Spanish and French might not look good in Chinese and Korean and Thai. Be aware that one character can have meaning in some languages. So in China, for example, most people's last name is just one character. And so you don't want to say, hey, warning, your last name is too short, because that is their last name. They can't make it longer. Another thing is don't concatenate your strings. So this is like talking about translations. And this is an example of that I had that it worked when I translated it to Spanish and Italian and French. And then I translated to Japanese and it did not work at all. So interpolate that data. Don't just like hard code and concatenate those strings. So to just have some final takeaways, make sure when you are designing your app that you are language, region, and culture independent. If you do that from the start, it's easier to localize in the future, but you can always go back and add that as well. Use open source projects to help you solve problems that you didn't know even existed, because there's just going to be so many edge cases, and especially if you've lived all your life in the US and you don't really interact with a lot of cultures, you might not understand that some of these things are a problem to these other cultures. And just remember that globalizing means that you have bigger markets, more inclusiveness, better code that's more extendable, and easier to manage. So my too long didn't listen, just be like Pitbull, Mr. Worldwide. And that's all I have, so thank you. Cool. I don't know if I'm the last one, if we have time for questions or...
Yeah, any questions?
Yeah.
You said you do not use Google Translate. What do you use?
So we actually pay a translation service. We send out those translations and a translator will bring them back. So unfortunately, there's not really a good way that's free to get those translations if you want them to like actually look good. All right, cool, thanks.
Let's give another hand of applause for these guys. Amazing talks. Thank you so much. Hope you guys learned a lot about these React ecosystem. It's huge, it's massive, it's very flexible, libraries, frameworks. If you want to present on a particular framework, let me know. We'll get you set up. Really appreciate it. Is there anything else I should add?
Thank you for hosting.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Are we good? Yep. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. Have a good night.
Yeah.